Welcome. You are at the CCC.
Where there are no outside issues. Hi, my name is Bonnie Violet. I'm a trans, femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist, digital chaplain, and I have on blue eyeliner today.
Ooh, blue eyeliner. My name is Anthony. I'm an addict alcoholic, 7th-year doctoral student in clinical psych. I am drinking a delicious chai, and as always, I care about you.
Yes, and I'm Lulu, and my pronouns are he and him. I'm a former Miss Castro Country Club in recovery for crystal meth and alcohol, and I am always in search of balance.
And each week we provide and create a brave space where we talk about topics of recovery.
Yes, and our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for those people in recovery.
By tackling topics sometimes used to separate us.
Absolutely.
But before we do that, like, subscribe, comment, share, and ding that bell. Ding, 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 ding,
ding, ding, ding. I was just trying to share. Like, I don't do it fast enough. I'm not like you guys. I'm old. I was trying to share it to my Facebook page so that because I went live and I was like, come and to my Facebook page and you can find out when I'm going on.
Well, hey, there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Right on.
I'm chewing right now.
Absolutely.
And that's the huge, isn't it?
I'm doing it to Brandon. I want people at home to know that Brandon refused to start the show today until I was done chewing.
So then once we started, then you did another bite.
If that were, I know exactly. If that were the case, we would not have started.
I know, right?
How is everyone?
I am good. I'm good. I had a meeting with my sponsor before this. It was really nice. I like to set up a meeting. I'm all about efficiency.
I didn't know you were being sponsored. Who sponsors you?
Oh, girl. Of course, Steve's being sponsored. His sponsor's amazing.
I know. Wait, are we part of the same sponsee family?
We are not.
Wait, who's your sponsor?
My sponsor is Philip.
Oh, right. I love Philip. Philip had a great show yesterday.
Yeah, Philip's amazing.
Yeah, sorry.
Absolutely amazing. It's all good.
That was a bad joke.
No, it wasn't. It
was a great joke.
It was, but you made an effort.
Right.
Listen, I'm just trying to be on both of your levels.
To quote somebody I heard once say, are you bored with yourself?
Because I'm bored. Okay, do you know what came around to bite me in the butt?
What came around?
Something I said to you in one of our episodes where I looked at my watch. Tell me why the other day someone did it to me and they're like, didn't you do that to Lulu? I was like, okay, all right.
No, it's
a full circle moment.
Full circle moment indeed.
I love it that people are watching and remembering.
Yeah, they're watching and they're vindictive, apparently.
You know,
well, and one thing we wanted to bring up, that speaking of our viewers, is if you would take the time to rate us on Apple, it just helps more people find us. So if you can't take the time, go right to the Apple podcast right now if you're not on it, and just give us a quick 5-star ranking.
Yes. Can I highlight? Thank you, Bonnie Violet, for saying that. And let me highlight that we are not a monetized podcast, so we're not profiting off of any likes or subscriptions or anything like that. This is simply about getting the word out to other LGBTQIA identified people in recovery and as many people who need to hear us.
Expand the conversation.
Yes. So have we all talked about how we're doing?
Enough.
Kind of.
Yeah, I mean, we're like 5 minutes in. We can start.
Yeah, let's do it. So today's topic is again.
Chewing.
I'm sorry. So today's topic is grace. So this is a very lovely topic.
Absolutely.
That was grace.
Yeah, that was grace. Yeah. Sorry. For folks at home, I'm sorry about chewing into the mic. Y'all need to know that when I get here, I'm normally running from work. I haven't had food yet, so I'm trying to eat something as quick as possible. Self-care. So hopefully you like to hear the sound of saliva.
It's
ASMR.
Yes.
Okay. It's funny. I think that's what you always see people on TikTok eating. And the other night after the drag show, I was that girl because I was like, I just got pizza and I want to go live. And so I'm eating pizza live in drag.
Yeah, we do on our downtime. There's so many things that we do on our downtime, like scrolling on our phones when we're taking a poop, or calling someone when you're on a walk.
I don't really talk to people about the fact that I scroll on my phone when I'm taking a poop. It's just,
You don't?
That's a personal thing.
I feel like that's like a universal truth.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's universal until you share it on the podcast.
Yeah, speaking of our masculinity conversation.
So big topic is grace. I love that.
And we're giving you grace right now.
We're giving you all the grace right now. So today's topic is grace. So many different contexts in which we use that word, grace in conversation, grace when referring to, say, divine energy, grace referring to a grace period.
Yeah, no, you're right.
All these different ways of referring to grace. Does anyone remember how we came upon grace? What I've been noticing is that a lot of our topics have been kind of naturally unfolding. From
exactly.
Topics.
All the topics we had at least 3 or 4 more topics on that sheet, and every week we've come up with something different, which is pretty amazing. Because I remember at one point Bonnie and I were like, "What else are we going to talk about?"
Right. Well, and Lulu, you had a friend who actually asked us to talk about this, right?
Well, yeah, I so basically, like, I share gratitude with a number of people, and let's see, I share an individual that I met this year at in Palm Springs. He spoke at a conference. We've been sharing gratitude, and he noticed that, like, one of the things I always include, every now and then is God's grace, because I think about that and how it affects my life, and so I include that grace in my life. And he was just talking about how, we should maybe talk about grace, because he really likes how I include it in. And let me find his exact words.
Okay.
He actually sent me a lovely message that I won't play because I didn't ask for permission. But actually, he sent it to.
I think that was your assignment for last week, was to ask for permission.
Well,
Oh, wow.
You know.
You say and share about grace really moves me. I would love, I think a beautiful podcast topic would be grace, the way that you live it. Have a good day. Bye.
They have a nice voice.
I know. And Tremaine, love you to death. I'm sorry I put your voice on without, but you inspired.
And you shared their name.
You were listening. You inspired. I didn't share his last name. They're not going to be able to find him. Calm down. You inspired this discussion. So I just want you to forgive me in advance.
Well, and just to recognize, they said how you display grace. So you inspired the topic.
Oh, well, I love that. But they inspired me to begin with. So it's like it's kind of like a volley back and forth. It's like chicken or the egg type situation.
Well, and I think one of the things about grace, I think, is it is something that I think can be experienced by others, and I think it's great to hear. And I mean, I experience a lot of grace with you as well, Lulu. And I think it's great that, I don't know, I just love that, somebody, I think that's a big part about grace. It's there is that part that we need to afford that to ourselves. And it's great for us to be on, say, the other end of grace. But I think also, like, how is it that we facilitate, or how is it that we afford grace to those around us?
I think what really helps me is the fact that we talk about it a lot. We don't necessarily call it grace when we're talking about it all the time, but we talk about it a lot. And I think acknowledging that you benefit from grace, benefit from on a regular basis, makes it easy in times when you need to extend it to others. There are times when I need to sit back and say, okay, maybe I should not make that comment about Anthony because Anthony's amazing. I'm if you're not watching, I just want you to know that Anthony has begun this thing that he does with the mic, and I'm like always
it just makes it easier.
Always waiting.
I'll explain why. So let's stick to grace for a second. So I was looking up the word grace, as we generally do on this podcast, to kind of ground us in things. And one of the things that I found that was really interesting is that one of the origins is traced back to Hebrew, and it means favor. And then one of the other things that I found was that grace was also defined as like unmerited. So something you didn't earn.
Yeah.
Right.
Like unmerited favor. Let me see if I can find the other part of that. But it was like basically unmerited divine assistance given to humans for their regeneration or sanctification. That's the religious grace.
I love that regeneration.
There's courteous goodwill. Do honor or credit to someone or something by one's presence. Simple elegance or refinement of movement. She moved through the water with effortless grace. But I think, go ahead.
Well, that's how I walked down the stairs at the CCC. I had actually a newcomer who said, "Oh my, you're so graceful." Okay, I just want to throw that in.
Were they new?
Extremely.
They were like in mid hallucination.
Wow.
You are very graceful socially, especially. But I think when we talk about grace, if I'm remembering correctly, we've had so many different conversations recently where we had to, at some point, be graceful to people, or people have been graceful to us. And I think it makes me think about how there's just certain things that we do for each other that we simply do not deserve, right? Or maybe deserving isn't the right word. I looked at you, Bonnie Violet, because I felt like maybe you would have something to say about that. But I think a lot of the times, you know, like when, for example, I'm in a situation with someone and I'm like, you know what, like I'm just going to give this to them because it's better to be sober than to be right. I think we've talked about that before. It's better to be sober than to be right.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
but better be happy than right.
Right.
I mean, for if sobriety is not your issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, just even recently, I was in it's so interesting because I forgave this person. I forgave these two different people. We were all in a situation together, and I forgave these two different people in one context. But I've noticed that my brain wants to kind of bring it back up and like hold on to certain parts of it. And so I think that's like my own work. That's not something I take to them, you know? But certainly grace as something that we give just for the sake of giving. It's similar to, I think, the way I've heard mercy used, but for mercy.
What do you think, Bonnie? Because I mean, it's like,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, grace is and has been a higher power for me, or has been my higher power. I often sometimes struggle with a religious God, or a God that is, I don't know, to me sometimes God is just an ideal. It's a it's a guide. It's just like a something to aspire to. And I think somebody who grew up in poverty and grew up feeling very much like she was less than, or was less valuable than the people around her, and in the world. And I knew different than that, especially like on a spiritual level. I believe that we all have the same value and we all have the same worth, and that's not something that we earn. It's just something that we have, whether that was given to us by God or some sort of divinity. I believe that in my heart of hearts, that that's just the truth of us. However, I walk around the world as if that's not true. I walk around off of the times, like we mentioned last week, how I feel like I'm too much for people and then not enough as well. And that's not being right size. But I think grace affords us and reminds me that that I'm just as valuable and just as worthy, and what I'm going through is just as important as what anyone else is going through or experienced, which is a hard thing for me to live into.
I think grace also allows you the time to kind of get right with that. Like grace for me is that if I'm not there, if I'm struggling to get there, it allows me the kind of room to kind of be messy and figure it out and get there eventually.
I'm thinking about this in like a real world context. That isn't to suggest that you two aren't, but I'm thinking just recently where I've been forced, maybe not forced, but I've been put in situations where I've had to think about just letting shit go. And I think that, putting it into this conversation, it has been what I've been, I think, maybe called to do on a spiritual level, is to be more graceful. And I think that's especially difficult when my ego's involved, and to be less abstract, because I know we say ego a lot on this podcast. When there's some part of like my identity that's like wrapped up in some outcome, or there's something about myself or some idea that's wrapped up in the outcome of a situation, it's very hard for me to be graceful because I feel like there's something at stake, right? And the only thing, or maybe one of the things that's been able to help me recently, is just acknowledging that things are always going to unfold in a way that either I'm going to agree with or I'm going to disagree with. But regardless of how I land on an issue, things just kind of continue to go on, right? So I can choose to, in the moment, hold on to something. I can choose to argue with you. I could choose to try to make you look dumb or prove myself right, but it does nothing. Mm-hmm. I think what it does do is it delays or inhibits grace from working through a relationship, right? And I think it's through grace that things grow, right? Either relationships grow or one's understanding of oneself grows. I've never heard of, or at least in my experience, I've never grown when I've fought with myself. It's only been when I've like stopped fighting or when I've allowed or I've forgiven myself for things, etc.
Yeah. I think grace for me is grace for myself is me taking that pause, like kind of like I heard you say, not acting right, maybe letting something go so that I can work through it and figure it out so that I don't create more shit. Right. So yeah, there's so many ways for grace to show up in my life. I think that the program was a great example because we always talk about this idea, like if I got what I deserve, I would be dead or I'd be in jail or whatever. And you have when I came into rooms, I felt like less, like this idea of less than, not a good person because of the choices that I've been making. But these people without knowing me welcomed me in and said, keep coming back. Yeah. And even while I was there, and I know that each of us have experienced disruptions that and we still say come back, or we don't, because I've always wanted to just show people the door. But thank God for other folks who had grace. Like perfect example, and I'll move on after this. When I worked here with the current executive director, and we were kind of like good cop, bad cop. I think I was bad cop, and he had so much grace for people who struggled. And I think it might have been because I was a little further removed from the time when I was in that dark place. And for me, I have to kind of constantly remind myself and go there that like the CCC and places like this are for the ones that are struggling the most.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I think it was Aristotle that said the wisest man knows that he knows nothing. And I think that's what it means to be graceful, is that like, I don't know shit. I may have an opinion about something, but I really don't know anything. You know, I can think I know the right and wrong way to do things, but maybe God's plans are a bit better than mine. They always have been. You know, I heard recently about a meeting that a few people called disastrous. And I remember, because I wasn't there, I was able to say, but wait, maybe that person needed to share in that way. And maybe someone in the room needed to hear people pop off. And maybe, you know, I think like there's just so much more freedom, I think, in just acknowledging that, you know what, we don't know. We don't know. I remember years ago when I was talking to my sponsor and we were talking about like my convictions, of which I have many in early sobriety. And she was saying to me, what do you think you need in a relationship? And I like started spouting off all of these things. And she said to me, how do you know that? You know, like, how do you know that you don't need, how do you know that you don't need maybe one shitty experience to maybe send you in a different direction that's more like fruitful for you? And so I think what she was kind of inviting me to do was to let go of the idea that I know better, right? And maybe turn things over to a power that's greater than myself, or to let God kind of be the decider on those things.
Yeah. I'm so quiet today. I'm sorry. Yeah, and grace is something that like I feel like I try to live into and practice a lot. I was actually listening to another podcast that I do with my aunt called Splintered Grace, and we haven't done that in a minute. But I was reading back to, or I was listening back to an episode called Misconceptions, and it was interesting because people were asking me about my father, In my relationship with my father, we were talking about like queer stuff. Some of the people that were listening were asking questions, and next thing I know, they're like, "So, what's your relationship like with your father?" And then my father showed up in the comments. Like this was back when my father still followed me on social media. But it was interesting to listen to myself. I feel like I was a lot better at affording grace to my father then than I am now. And I think grace is just something that it can be helpful because, like you said, we don't always get what we deserve. So I think when we do the things thinking that we're going to get a result that we want and then we don't get it, I think understanding grace is helpful there, because I think it's hard. I think for me, grace is just an easier kind of theology to get behind than some of the other ways of making sense of the world and the things that happen in the world that aren't fair or aren't right or shouldn't happen.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think
What?
it's just a picture.
You guys are shaking. Is there an earthquake in San Francisco?
No, someone's touching our someone was touching our camera.
I know. It's like
I don't want to say any names.
This is what happens when you invite people into the studio.
To the studio space. So so what I'm thinking of, so I had this epiphany the other day. I don't know if it was much of an epiphany, but I was thinking about the role of love and like love actually being this very tangible thing. And I'm not thinking about like love and behaviors, but love as like a thing that, okay, for example, you know how you blow up a balloon, right?
Yeah.
We blow up a balloon. We know there's air in that balloon by virtue of the balloon expanding, right? And so, but if we let that air out, we can't see it with the naked eye. And so the thought I had was like,
you can smell it if your breath bad.
Yeah.
Sorry,
no, I love it. I feel like there's probably a metaphor in there that we can work with later. So before I was interrupted, so you can put air inside of a balloon and you can let that air out, right? Yeah. And the only evidence we have of that air is the balloon expanding. And so I was thinking about love in a very similar way, where if I can be in loving relationship with someone, and sometimes that means I'm being graceful. What that means is like, maybe I'm looking at someone and I'm thinking to myself, you know what, I may not understand what you're going through. I may have these feelings that are coming up for me, but in this moment, I'm going to choose to love you. That's a decision that I'm going to make. Despite everything, I'm going to choose to love you. And I think what happens in that situation, at least this is when I've been on the receiving end of that, is like there is a feeling that fills me up. Yeah. Right. And that feeling that fills me up then influences other decisions that I can make. And it also influences the relationship I have with other people. And so that's been really helpful to me to think about love as something that is actually concrete, that it isn't like this kind of amorphous thing that flies around, but it's number one, a decision. Love is a decision. And the second part is that love is an actual entity that we can kind of hold and create and give to each other.
Yeah. Love, in this sense, it's love and grace almost seems like the exact same.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, is it conditional?
Oh, I think on our end, it's a conditional.
As humans,
on our end, it's like because I'm not perfect. Because I was thinking while you were talking, the more that I love you, the more that I like you, the more grace you receive. If I don't like you, if we don't deal, I'm probably less likely to give you grace. And I'm working on that. I'm absolutely working on that. But in the moment, in the time, it's like I find that in that space, when it comes to grace, I have to self-correct constantly.
For sure. I had a conversation with a sponsee recently about that. Yeah. My sponsee was saying to me, well, I was good to so-and-so and I was good to so-and-so. And I'm like, it's easy to be good to people that are nice to you. You know what I mean?
Hello.
Like it's good.
Or that you want to hook up with.
Yeah.
I like you. It's like, I'm going to be nice. You get away with anything.
Of course. Very easy to be graceful and loving to those people. And I think where it matters is in Bonnie, I'll give you the mic in a second, where I think it matters, or I think where like we are called to do the work when we say like, faith without work is, what is it? Faith
without works is dead.
Yeah, faith without works. It's the same thing. It's like we are invited. I think my opinion, we are invited to actually work our program when we are in those difficult situations, when we're like in front of someone that we think is like out of pocket, or maybe we wish they weren't around, etc. And by they weren't around, I don't mean dead. I just mean like maybe
exactly. That's why I don't carry a pocket knife for that reason.
Bonnie Violet, what were you gonna say?
Well, I was just thinking, I don't know that, like, because I think there are plenty of people that I'm close to, I feel like in some ways I might have a higher expectation of them. So grace might be more difficult. I think in some situations, because I know you were saying that, like, I think sometimes it might be easier to allow grace to strangers than it is to like people that are really close to me. Not all, but I think, you know, and I think it's different. I guess there's probably this perception of whether or not they're trying to be different. Like if they're still gonna just be an asshole or still kind of keep like whatever, it's harder to allow grace that way, unless I feel like there's certain amount of whatever. And I guess that's why I'm not the like the ultimate giver of grace, you know, because
That's when they give you grace, because I'm thinking about a situation that I had here at the club with a person who's sitting in this room, and I went in on them, and not you, and I read them the riot act because of how they had been showing up. And really the truth of it is, and I expressed this, that I love them to death, but it really wasn't my, it was me being about their stuff and not, and this person in gave me grace because not that they would have gotten up and done anything, because it wouldn't happen, but they still love me. I see them smiling over and giving me absolute love. And it tends to happen when you really care about people. When you really, yeah, exactly. Ricky.
yeah.
When
You are a rapper.
No, exactly. It tends to happen when you really care about people. It's like, maybe what it is like, there are times when I'm not able to give grace and other people give me grace. And again, going back to that, talk about like being mindful or being aware, like, oh, this is what happened. Because if I was still stuck in my stupid, as they say, I would not have been able to stop and say, oh, wait, you know what? This person is loving. And as much as I wanted to read them the riot act, I was wrong. that was uncomfortable.
Yeah. I hear that. Bunny Violet, you were reminding me of what I think happens when we are in love with someone. Like, I think, at least in my experience.
Bonnie?
No, I'm not in love with Bonnie Violet.
But
no.
But the way you guys like interact sometimes, no,
I think Bonnie Violet, she and I are naturally flirty people. Are you flirty, Bonnie Violet?
I like that.
Yeah, I guess so. I can be.
Wait.
She funny. But so I think when you're in love with someone, I think it's very easy to elevate them to the level of superhero or to this kind of an idol, without knowing it. And so if they deviate from any of that, there's a way that we can come down on our lovers or our romantic partners, right? And it's, for example, I noticed, with a friend, my friend, there might be like a minor transgression with a friend, but if I'm in a relationship and that same thing were to occur, there's a kind of crumbling that has happened for me historically. I don't know that would happen now, because I've done some work around that, but
okay, so from my experience with that, and I understand like and validate like where you're at with that, Bonnie. But for me, when I love you, when I invite you, like I've always found you have to do something really intensely, whatever, to cause me to change my opinion of you, because I've practiced this idea of releasing people to just be, and not taking it personally, especially if it's someone that I care about. And usually, like in my mind, I'll play it through, but it's like I understand what you're saying about like if I put someone on a pedestal, but I think that I don't know that I put everyone on the. I lift it, I elevate them, I lift them in my life, but I don't put them on a pedestal.
Yeah,
because maybe because I'm arrogant. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not. I hear you. I don't think it's about putting people on a pedestal. I think it's about how much access we give someone to ourselves, right? And I think that it's much easier, I think, for me anyway, to get hurt by someone I'm close to because there's a story I've already started to tell myself about them. And I think a lot of the arguments that happen between people have to do with shared vulnerabilities. I think like when we have histories that are very similar to each other, we might have the same vulnerabilities. And so we might kind of pop off at each other. And it's not because anything personal, it's because we have stories that have allowed for us to make certain conclusions about ourselves and other people. To be less vague, I mean, for example, like one of the like it took me a very long time to get a chip off my shoulder. I came from the East Coast. I was like used to being very defensive. And so when I came out here and I was around other people who were just like me, it was really easy for us to have arguments all the time. And then when I realized I got sober, I started doing all this work, started going to therapy, doing all of this stuff, I realized, oh shit, like it was all these old stories I had, there were all these ways, old ways of being in the world. Just quickly before we go on, it's 4:30. I want to invite people at home, if you're listening in, we should have done this a little earlier, but if you're listening at home and anything is resonating with you, any ideas that are coming up to popping up in your brain, please share them with us. As usual, we always want to hear from you.
Pop, pop, pop.
Pop, 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 pop. So, yeah, grace, love, relationships.
Well, and do you feel like maybe the challenge with grace, or I guess where grace comes difficult maybe to afford others, I guess, might be when somebody maybe plays a role in your life that maybe is beyond just friendship. I wonder if, like, because if I think about it, sometimes it's harder to have grace with family. And so I'm wondering if some of it is like having to let go of expectations of what role that person may play in your life.
I have an answer to this, at least for myself. I think there are two parts of this. I think the first part is it's kind of like surrendering history, right? Like a lot of, I think, the upsets that I have to do with history. They have to do with stories that I've told myself, stories that I continue to tell myself. And when I am very present with someone, that is, I'm allowing you to be the person you are in front of me right at the second, as opposed to this person I have all this history with, there's a lot more grace happening there for me.
Yeah.
But that is very hard for me to get to if I'm still holding on to old shit. So for example, like one of the most humbling things that has resulted from my previous relationship is like, after so much time, I had to like realize like, oh shit, like I had so much a part to do with that. And looking back, I can see that he and I were in a lot of pain and we were trying to get through a lot of things. And that the both of us, we were just actually doing our very best. Right. And it took that disruptive relationship, I think, for the both of us in order for me to arrive at a place where I'm like, oh shit. Right. And so I think the same thing happens with people when you get close.
Yeah.
Hey,
so I was thinking about this while you all were talking.
Yeah.
Like another way to look at grace is, okay, so I always say, like, if I don't value what we have together, I don't give you my energy. So if I hold somebody to a higher standard, or if I challenge them or whatever, that can be grace as well, because I am not just, I'm not dismissing. I'm giving value to this relationship by expressing to you that, where I'm showing up in a sort. Do you know what I'm getting at?
Yep.
That grace is not just about me looking the other way, but saying, you know what, I believe that you are more than this. I believe that we're more than this, and that the way this is going to be better is that we are able to have honest, genuine conversations that are not always neat and tidy,
right,
and that can be uncomfortable. And I think in your instance, Bonnie, because you are walking through this right now, and it's like the grace that you give or may not give is because like you're in it right now. It's like, it's understandable. I think it's understandable. We're human. Like, maybe I can't show up in a graceful way. I can do as much as I can. Like, it took me a really long time, like with my father. I came out to him as gay, I don't know how many times, until finally, after enough people in my life had passed and I grew up and got sober or whatever, I was like, okay, you know what? I don't need to explain this anymore. I love this person, and I'm going to understand that maybe they're not where they need to be, but it is not, I think it has a lot to do with the fact that it's not going to affect me today.
Right.
And so,
right.
Does everyone deserve grace?
I think
so.
I think everyone deserves grace, but we don't have to be the persons to give it if we can't.
Right.
I think that grace it's kind of like my sponsor always says, everyone has a higher power, and I get to turn it over. I get to let you have your relationship with higher power. I don't need to lose sleep over whether or not I'm going to give you grace today.
Can I tell you that when Bonnie Violet asked that question, and am I listening to you right now, it made me think about that grace for me has so much to do with what am I doing with the uncomfortable feeling that's showing up. And so I think that's the conflict for me, because it is a lot easier for me to fight you or fight anyone, right, than it is for me to say, okay, I'm going to take care of myself right now, right? Because on my best days, when I'm well fed and I've slept enough and I'm prayed up and I've meditated, all of the kind of harsh feelings that come up for me, they're just mine. And I'm not trying to get.
You were always well fed. We have a comment.
You body shaming me?
No. Jalen. Oh my God, we can't go without. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, giving grace from a setting boundaries perspective is something I struggle with fiercely, because the overall motive for me is to protect myself and my feelings so that I don't have to act on certain character defects. I have many conversations about what forgiveness and grace looks like. I'm embarking on step 9, and I know that I have to give myself an immense amount of grace to be able to maybe provide the peace that I've always longed for from people who deserve that same grace. So it was said.
Right. Jalon chapter 4.
I know.
Jalon chapter 4, verse 33, Proverbs.
It's like we are believers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Jalon. Well said.
And the word was spoken.
And the word was spoken. And God said, let there be light. And there was, and it was great.
And it was great.
So I love this conversation.
And I love that it's going in that direction. I love it's going in that direction because I think that, like, obviously, my relationship with the divine.
It's on both sides.
Sorry. My relationship with the divine is that grace comes to me without me having to do anything. But I think that when we come from this angle, obviously, I wish that I could give everyone everything unconditionally, but I don't.
Right.
But we are works in progress.
We sure are.
We are works in progress. And I think that we're having the conversation. If you're participating in the conversation, we're having the conversation. So this is the grace that we give to ourselves, that we're having these conversations.
Right. And collectively, it's like, just like, because I believe that we all are so interconnected, and that, like, we are all one to some degree, then grace, it can and always will be given, but it, like Anthony says, maybe not by you, but somebody, like one of us or part of us, will be able to show up, hopefully, with grace for that person or that situation, like collectively as a collective, because it's for the betterment of us all, that grace is afforded to all of us all the time.
I agree. Can I tell you one of the best things I've learned in recovery is that the longer I stick around, the more similarities I see we have in our personalities. And I'm not even talking about our stories. I'm talking about the way we react to situations.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And the more I see that, the more I'm able to be like, oh, this shit ain't personal. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like,
it's not exactly. When you get there, it wasn't about me. It was never about
never
me.
was. It never is. I remember when like at the beginning of COVID, when we were having all these Zoom meetings, I went to some meeting in like the UK, and there were people talking, and then one in Australia, and I was like, man, they sound just as crazy as we do here. And that was, I think, one of the best experiences from my recovery. Yeah, it was just crazy. I was like, wow, like addiction, alcoholism, all of it, like it looks the same, it manifests in the same ways. And go ahead.
Well, I do think it's probably something that we notice because we're all on the same kind of recovery path. So we are all learning to see things in a similar way and to address those things as they happen in a similar way. So I think that's a big part of it.
And the language is like, it's amazing how, like, based on a conversation with someone that I may not have met ever, I can tell through certain buzzwords. Something about self-help, where you either know something about 12.
Yeah, but I remember when I was early in recovery in Idaho, and a girlfriend of mine who was not sober, she's like a Jesus person now or whatever, but she had said something that I had learned by getting sober. And I was like, how the fuck do you know that? You don't know that. Like, you haven't gotten sober, I was like, and then I was like, oh wait, people come to this wisdom, or come to wisdom differently. And there isn't necessarily just one way to get there.
Take it to church. Yeah, I agree. I've thought for a long time that there are so many ways up the same mountain. You know what I mean? I think that in any pursuit
of deep you two sound. There's so many ways up the same mountain. There's only one way down that mountain when I push you.
Would you stop? Would you you go to timeout? But I think, I think that like I said, there are so many ways up the same mountain. From all the different things that I've read, like from different religious texts to philosophy, I think whenever people are in the pursuit of excellence, which I think is like spiritual divine excellence, whether you're a scientist or an artist, at some point people just start saying the same shit. And I think that's because, we're all, like you were saying, Bonnie Violet, we're all moving in this direction, and we're coming upon the wisdom in some way. I feel like there are very few unique things that we read anymore because it's all been said, I think we all become, I think, at least for me, I think a lot of us have become seekers, right? God could and would if God were saw. And I think we are seeking. And I think a lot of people who seek God in whatever way that is, we come upon the same information at the same time.
I think yes, and there's a part of me though that still believes
the yes and.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead.
Because I don't because something hasn't clicked yet, right? There's still a lot of violence, a lot of things that aren't right in the world. So we can't just keep learning the same shit and doing the same shit. There has to be some sort of innovation or some sort of new thing that comes about. And I think for me, that's the struggle that I have with really discerning what's good shit, what's good practice still, and what needs to be changed, and that often needs to happen by being in people who have a different perspective and a different experience than I do.
I think you're onto something. I think that's the reason why we have religious wars. I think
that's levels, because
right.
I think the reason it's kind of like the fact that how we do all the same readings over and over again. There's still, like you said, there's still some people who haven't gotten that, and we have to be patient with them, just like some people were patient with us, because I haven't always been in this place where I can think the way that I'm thinking.
Yeah, but I just feel like we can't just stop there.
No, exactly. Exactly, but we don't stop there. We keep doing the work, but we still, we're patient and trust that someday the ones that aren't there will get it.
Wait, there was one more thing I wanted to say.
Go ahead.
So I think that's really insightful, Bonnie Violet. The reason why I'm saying that is because I've often thought about that. Like I've often thought, like, well, wait a minute, why do we still come up upon these things? And I think it's kind of like, let's use the Bible, for example. Like the Bible, although a divinely inspired text, was still written by humans, right? The big book, although perhaps divinely inspired, was still written by humans, right? And humans can't help but have human thoughts. Right. And I think that's like one, I forget for we are all sinners and fall short of the glory of God. I think it's the line from the Bible. And I think that is why we keep coming. Personally, I think that's why we have these conflicts with ourselves and other people, because we're humans. And there's so many different things competing. I mean, dare I say our souls, or dare I say our minds? I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, yes, and I think that just if I kind of push it a little further, or to say it in another way, is like, we have to learn, we have to not repeat in history. You know what I mean? We need to learn from history. Otherwise, we're doomed to repeat it. And so I feel like oftentimes we can get stuck in these cycles. And I feel like that's what my frustration has been a little bit more, is like trying to figure out, okay, kind of you go through a process, right? Okay, we've done through a process, and I'm not saying I've done the process and I'm done with recovery or whatever, but there's this feeling like there's got to be something more or something different than
like a topic
this.
For like us to continue.
Yeah, I think so.
Like this sounds like a topic because it's gone beyond grace, just grace.
Yeah.
So I think that we should consider this because it's really kind of deep, and it's not going to be resolved in a few minutes.
So it was said.
So if you ever want to get in touch with the Lulu, you can always reach me on the gram at LouieLou86.
And hi, I'm Bonnie Violet, and I just want to say for folks who might be coming across this as well, is just to, like, if you are in your feels over like what happened over this weekend in Colorado Springs, to like really reach out to one another and hug one another. If you're not LGBTQ, like reach out and check in on your LGBTQ folks, because even if we don't live in Colorado Springs, even if we weren't at that bar, a lot of us are impacted and we're feeling it. So I just want to acknowledge that, because I think that's a really big trauma that a lot of us are going through collectively, and we're all dealing with it on our own. But I just wanted to just kind of bring that up. If you're feeling the way you're feeling, or you're not, like, that's okay. And you can find me, Bonnie Violet, at A Queer Chaplain on all of the things.
Thank you, Bonnie Violet, for bringing that up.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. Yeah, I think this is, if I can add to that, I think this is, for me, another reminder that as a community, we've been strong for a very long time. We'll continue to be strong. And like we like to say in the rooms, you don't have to do any of this alone. And you can kind of find me on Instagram at @lucasccc. Or if you'd like, you can send us all an email at podcast@castrocountryclub.com. Or you can, what is this? Oh, find us all on Instagram. So we have a new Instagram account.
Yeah.
It's on Instagram. It's just @the CCC. So if you want to follow us, our podcast there. And then if you want to send us an email, you can email us at podcast@castrocountryclub.org. Damn, look at all these messages just coming in, Brandon. Mm-hmm. So the second one is, if you want to leave us a message because you're feeling awfully chatty, you can leave us a message at speakpipe.com. So that's speakpipe.com/@the CCC.
Yes, and the Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBTQ plus recovery community.
We provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth.
Our vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to community, opportunity, and support. You can find more information at castrocountryclub.org.
Yes, and tune in every Tuesday at 4 p.m.-ish when we go live on our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels.
Find us all on all of your favorite podcast sources.
Don't forget to rate us.
Rate us. Yeah, rate us.
Slap
Tell your
us
friends
with a
about
five,
us.
Girl, flat 5.
All the 5s. And of course, as usual, we love you. We'll see you next week.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.